There is something you love, or have loved, or sense you could love if the conditions were different, that the world you live in has no adequate place for. Not the ordinary loves, the ones that fit the social architecture. The other one. The love that does not serve the career or the family role or the identity you have built. The orientation of the whole self towards something that the practical life keeps asking you to manage, contain, defer, fold into the available form. You have been managing it for years, folding it in, finding ways to honor it partially while meeting the obligations that the life requires. And the managing is exhausting in a way that is different from ordinary exhaustion, because what is being managed is not a burden, but a love. And the love does not diminish with the managing. It persists, it keeps arriving, it keeps asking for more of you than the available form can contain. Mirabai, the 16th century Rajput princess, poet, and devotional mystic who was one of the most beloved figures in the Indian Bhakti tradition, had no philosophical framework for the managing. She refused it. She chose the love over the kingdom, over the family honor, over the social position that every person in her world understood to be the most important thing a woman of her class could hold. She is not recommending this to everyone. She is demonstrating what happens when the love is genuine enough that the managing becomes impossible. When the orientation of the whole self toward the object of its devotion asserts itself with more force than the architecture of the ordinary life can contain. She sang. From the rooftops, in the temples, in the streets of the holy city where she eventually landed after everything else had been given up. She sang because the love could not be silent. And what the singing produced, the poems and songs that have been transmitted across 5 centuries and that millions of people in India still sing today, is the most direct available record of what happens when a human being stops managing the deepest love of their life and allows it to be what it is. There is a specific grief in the managed love that is rarely named directly. Not the grief of love lost, the grief of love that is present and being held at a distance from its full expression. The person who knows what they love with extraordinary clarity, the work that is genuinely theirs, the practice that reaches something nothing else reaches, the orientation of the soul that feels more fundamentally real than any of the other orientations the life contains, and who has learned, through years of the practical life's demands, to give it less than it asks for. The social architecture of most lives does not have space for the love that demands everything. It has space for the love that can be fitted in, the passion pursued on weekends, the calling attended to when the obligations allow, the spiritual practice maintained at the level at which it does not disrupt the professional schedule, the art made in the margins of the life organized around the things that pay. Mirabai looked at this architecture and found it inadequate. Not because she was irresponsible. Her critics accused her of exactly this, and she engaged them with intelligence and precision, but because the love she was carrying, the Bhakti devotion to Krishna that had been present in her from childhood, that had organized her entire interior life around the single point of the divine beloved, was not the kind of love that fits in margins. It was the whole of the thing. It was what she was. And the architecture that asked her to give it partial expression while preserving the social forms of her royal marriage was asking her to be less than she was. She chose the love. The full cost is documented in her songs. The poisoned cup her in-laws allegedly sent, the snake they disguised as a garland, the eventual departure from the palace, the years as a wandering saint, the eventually arriving in Vrindavan and Dwarka, where she sang and composed until her death. Whether all the details are historically accurate is less important than what they are pointing at. The record of a person who chose the full expression of the love over the comfortable, socially sanctioned partial expression, and who found, in the choosing, not the tragedy her society expected, but the fullness her love had always been pointing toward.
Mirabai was born around 1498 into the Rathore clan of Rajput nobility in Merta, in what is now Rajasthan. From childhood, she showed the intense devotional orientation that would define her life. She is reported to have seen a wedding procession as a child and asked her mother who would be her husband. When her mother, half-jokingly, pointed to an image of Krishna, Mirabai received it as literal truth. Krishna was her husband. The love that most Rajput women of her class were expected to direct toward their earthly spouse, Mirabai directed entirely and without remainder toward the divine. She was married, as was customary and politically necessary, to Bhoj Raj, the crown prince of Mewar, one of the most powerful Rajput kingdoms. The marriage placed her in the center of the elaborate social world of Rajput royal life, with its codes of honor, its family obligations, its expectations of wifely devotion and purdah, and the management of appearances that constituted the life of a royal woman. She did not comply. She continued her devotional practices, singing, dancing, worshiping at the temple of Krishna, composing the poems that her in-laws found embarrassing and that she could not stop. Her husband died young. Her father-in-law died. The family that remained found her refusal to conform increasingly intolerable. The poisoned cup, the snake disguised as garland, the attempted drowning, whether or not each specific episode is historical, they represent the sustained pressure of a social world trying to force the conformity that Mirabai's love would not permit. She eventually left the palace. The date is uncertain. She traveled, sang, and composed, finding community among the Bhakti saints of her time, seeking out Tulsi Das, being celebrated in some places and criticized in others. She spent her final years in Vrindavan and Dwarka, the cities associated with Krishna's mythological life, singing the songs that had been accumulating since childhood. She died around 1547, though the legendary accounts vary. Some say she merged into the image of Krishna in the temple at Dwarka. Her body was not found after she entered to sing her final song. Whether literally true or not, the image is philosophically precise. The person who organized the entire life around the love arrived at the end at the place where the lover and the beloved are no longer separate, where the singing and the singer are the same thing, where the love, fully expressed, is finally complete. The poems and songs she left, the Bhajans that are still sung daily across India, still heard in temples and on the lips of people who may not know her biography but know her songs, are among the most direct transmissions of devotional love in any language. They are the record of someone who loved so completely that the love became the primary fact of the life, and everything else arranged itself around that fact, whether the social world approved or not. The philosophy in the songs. Mirabai does not build systematic philosophical arguments. She is not a treatise writer. She is a singer. What the songs contain is demonstrated rather than argued, the living record of a life organized around the principle that the truest love is worth everything it costs, and that the cost of not following it is higher than the cost of following it all the way. Several of the core recognitions. First, the divine beloved is more real than the social order. Mirabai addresses Krishna with the directness and intimacy of a person addressing a lover who is genuinely present, not a theological concept, not a symbol, not the object of a prescribed religious practice. The beloved who she is singing to is, in her experience, more genuinely real and more genuinely present than the social world that keeps asserting its priority. The in-laws, the protocols, the reputation, the shame, these are real and she acknowledges them, but they are less real than the love, and the love's reality is the one she organizes her life around. Second, the longing itself is the teaching. The Bhakti tradition in which Mirabai stands is the tradition of Viraha, the ache of separation from the beloved that is the primary vehicle of spiritual development. The longing for Krishna is not the problem to be solved on the way to the union, it is the condition in which the soul is most fully awake to what it loves and what it is. The ache is not suffering to be escaped, it is the form that love takes in the condition of apparent separation, and it is, in the Bhakti understanding, the most available and most direct form of spiritual practice.
This is the recognition that translates most directly into any life. The longing you carry for what you love most deeply, the thing that the managed life has been keeping at a productive distance, is not evidence of deprivation. It is evidence of the love. It is the form that the love takes when it is not being fully expressed. And the following of the longing, the allowing of the love to be what it is, rather than what the available architecture has space for, is the practice. Third, the public singing is the public act. Mirabai did not keep the love private. She sang on the rooftops. She sang in the streets. She sang at a time and in a social world where the public expression of a royal woman's interior life was itself a radical act. The singing was not performance for an audience. It was the overflow of a love that had filled the interior life completely and was pressing outward. The singing was the love expressing itself in the only form adequate to its intensity. Now the bridge. Because Mirabai was a 16th century Rajput princess expressing a specific Hindu Bhakti devotion to Krishna in the specific social context of Rajput royal culture, and most people watching this video are not. But here is what translates directly. The love you are managing, the orientation of the self toward what it most genuinely loves, the work, the practice, the art, the path, the person, the relationship with the divine, that the ordinary architecture keeps asking to be made smaller, more contained, more fitted to the available form. The longing that keeps arriving despite the managing, the thing that refuses to be reduced to its permitted portion. Mirabai is not prescribing the abandonment of all obligations. She is not recommending that everyone leave the palace. She is demonstrating what happens when the love is genuine enough and the gap between the love and the available expression wide enough that the managing eventually becomes impossible. And she is pointing at the longing itself, the Viraha, as the evidence. The longing that refuses to diminish despite the managing is the love telling you what it is. She is not asking you to sing on the rooftops. She is asking you to take the longing seriously, to stop treating it as the evidence of irresponsibility or naivety, to recognize it as the most honest information available about what your life is actually organized around in its depths, and to ask, honestly, what it would mean to close the gap between that depth and the surface of the life being lived. Here is what Mirabai asks of you, practically, today. First, name what you are managing rather than following. The love, the calling, the orientation of the soul that the practical life keeps asking you to contain. Not the love that has never been present, the love that is present and that you have learned to give less than it asks for. The specific, available, entirely real direction of the whole self that the architecture keeps asking to be made partial.
Name it. Not to announce it publicly or to make immediate dramatic changes. To know it, in the Mirabai spirit. The full, unmanaged, unsoftened recognition that this is what the life is organized around in its depths, whether the surface acknowledges it or not. Second, give it 1 hour of full expression. Not the managed portion, 1 hour in which the love is allowed to be what it is, without the calibrations that the ordinary day requires. The practice pursued for its own sake rather than for its productivity. The art made without the audience's expectations as the organizing principle. The prayer or the meditation or the sitting in the quality of the presence that the longing is pointing toward, not as a scheduled activity, but as the response to the love that is asking for it. This is the Mirabai practice in its most available form, not the abandonment of the palace, the hour that is given fully rather than partially, the space in the day in which the love is allowed to express itself without the managing that the rest of the day requires. Third, follow the Viraha, the longing that arrives in the absence of the full expression, the ache, the specific, reliable, fully informative quality of wanting that is the love making itself known through the gap between what it is and what it is being allowed to be. Instead of managing the longing, filling it with something else, moving quickly to the next thing, treating it as evidence of a lack to be addressed, try sitting with it. Receive the longing as information, as the love speaking, as the most honest available evidence about what the life is actually reaching for and what it will not stop reaching for regardless of how many times the managing interrupts the reaching. Fourth, sing one true thing. Not on the rooftop, in whatever form singing takes in your life, one genuine expression of what the love actually is, in the conversation, in the writing, in the work, in the relationship, that is more honest than the managed version you have been offering. Not the full aria, one true phrase, the thing that is actually there, said or made or offered in the form that the love dictates rather than the form that the available architecture can most comfortably receive. I want to close with the image that stays with me when I think about Mirabai. Not the palace she left or the streets where she sang. The childhood moment. The small girl watching the wedding procession and asking who her husband would be. The mother's gesture toward the image of Krishna. The girl receiving this not as a joke or a metaphor, but as the literal truth of her life. She was perhaps 5 years old. She had no framework for what she was receiving. She had only the directness of a child who had not yet learned the managing, who had not yet developed the sophisticated calibrations of the adult who knows that certain loves cannot be followed all the way without cost. She received the love as it was and organized the rest of her life around it. Everything that followed, the marriage, the poisoned cups, the singing, the wandering, the departure, the arrival at Vrindavan, the songs that are still being sung 5 centuries later, was the consequence of that one moment of ungoverned reception, of a love received without the managing that adult life eventually learns to apply to everything that asks for too much. The managing is understandable. It is often necessary. Mirabai knew it was necessary. She engaged it at length and chose against it, not because she was reckless, because the love was more real than the architecture. And the architecture, subjected to that test, did not hold. You carry a love of similar quality. The question is not whether to follow it all the way. The question is how much of it you are currently allowing to be what it is, and how much you have been managing because the available architecture asks for the management. The songs are waiting, whatever form they take in you. They have been waiting a long time. Here is the question Mirabai leaves us with today. What love are you managing? What orientation of the whole self toward what it most genuinely loves have you learned to give less than it asks for? And what would it mean, not the full abandonment of the palace, but the one genuine hour, the one true thing said or made or offered, to give it slightly more today than you gave it yesterday? The Viraha knows. It has been telling you. The longing that keeps arriving despite the managing is the love refusing to be made smaller than it is. Follow it, not all the way today. One step, one song, 1 hour of full expression. The beloved is not far. Mirabai sang this for 50 years. The singing was the finding. I'll see you in the next one.